Hello, welcome back to another episode of Yarns for the Soul with Nicole. I'm bringing you another mini yarn today. Feels good to be back after a bit of a hiatus, figuring out my life. But it's also been nice kind of giving myself some space, and plenty of new topic ideas kind of came to light along the way on my travels. Today I wanted to have a yarn about the concept of time and value, which is something I've been particularly thinking about now, but also since I left New Zealand and earlier this year. So I'd never really thought about the concept of time before. I think I'd always struggled to visualize what my future would look like, whereas I felt like other people around me would have like 5 and 10 year plans. I remember the first personal development course that I did in the end of 2021, and part of one of the modules looked at this idea of visualization and looking at where do you want to be in 6 months, in a year, 2 years, 5 years, and I just couldn't comprehend what I would be up to. I thought maybe 6 months time, life might look kind of the same, but I had no concept of what I wanted to be doing in 5 years time. And I wonder, looking back now, like giving the timing of all of that, the connection between my inability to see a future and kind of connections with grief and depression as well. But in society we have these ideas that are still quite traditional, I think, about what your lifespan should involve, and there's sort of the distinct phases within that. I'd gone through my 20s kind of living fairly in line with this time frame, like went to uni, did the study, got my first job, second job, third job, and expanded my skill set, a couple of pay rises, and then it wasn't until like my late 20s I started seeing friends and peers doing the family thing, buying a house, or they'd be taking these big leaps forward in their professional lives, and I started feeling pressure of like, well, what's my next phase? And I hadn't really questioned it until then. It was always a problem, like future me, I don't have to think about it yet, but like I'd known from a young age I wasn't interested in children, or like marriage possibly one day. Again, I don't have to think about that. And I'd moved around so often that kind of became my normal as well, and the idea of settling in one place became slightly terrifying. And I always knew there was so much of the world I wanted to see, wanted to keep learning and exploring and collecting new experiences, but I was like, well, where does this fit in this like traditional timeline that was demonstrated to me growing up? And so earlier this year I decided to apply for a 2-year visa to the UK. Luckily, very easy to get for New Zealanders, and the particular visa, the cutoff was 30 and now it's 35, so plenty more time to explore. And my best friend was getting married in France, so a trip to Europe was always on the cards for me. I was definitely going to make that happen. And then started thinking, well, why don't I stay longer on the other side of the world? And not in a depressing way, but I felt like I didn't have a lot holding me in New Zealand. I was self-employed by that stage. I didn't own property, I was lucky that I felt like the distance wouldn't affect my friendships. My friends would still be there when I came back and would keep in touch in the meantime. And, family connections, I no longer had any grandparents. So there was also, I felt like if I did have to make a trip home, it would be in the worst case sort of scenario. So it felt a bit odd to realise that I had so little attachment that I could just kind of pack my life into a bag or two, and that I could do anything I wanted with that freedom. But then I started thinking about, well, like, okay, next 2 years, say I have the UK visa for 2 years, it'll be mid-2025 by the time I get home. I'll be 32 years old. if I extended my visa for a further year, I'd come home, I'd be 33. And then I was thinking, visa options for other countries. I could go to Canada for a couple of years on my way home, stay somewhere in Europe. And my intention was always just to explore, to meet new people, have new experiences. I didn't really come here with any other particular purpose. I didn't come here wanting to get top law job and gain experience in that sense. But then I couldn't help but question if this was a valuable use of my time for the next 2-3 years, possibly more. I was just comparing these choices to everyone else and thought going away for a couple of years to just explore because I wanted to didn't feel as valuable for some reason as, maybe trying to buy a house or focusing on my career. But I caught myself in those thoughts. I spoke to close friends and they helped me reflect on this. I'd, been beating myself up about this idea that I wasn't using my time wisely, that it wasn't a valuable choice, but where did this notion come from? What makes time valuable? And, our capitalist society tells us that we should stay in this rat race, move on to the next thing, get into more debt, possibly have all of the shiny things. And society still, for the most part, tells women that we're meant to want to find a man as well, settle down, find a white picket fence and, a couple of kids, a dog. Sounds like a cheesy country music song. But for those of us that don't want those things, it feels like there's no clear alternatives. It was never demonstrated to us. And so then you sort of realize, well, there's sort of this void of time. What do I do with this time? And I think we're taught to focus on the next thing, always either working your way up the ladder, bigger and better houses or cars or whatever it might be. And we just forget that there's magic in the journey, in the being present. And one of the most helpful books I read in the depths of my grief was The Power of Now. Admittedly, still haven't finished it, but I read enough. It made a lasting impact, and I often still bring myself back to that now and thinking about the value of being in the present moment. I think someone else also said that, depression lives in the past, anxiety lives in the future, and you don't really want to spend a lot of time in either of those places, whereas the present is actually all that exists. So rather than mentally going forwards or backwards, just staying in the now can be so powerful. And a more mainstream reference perhaps might be Miley Cyrus's song The Climb, and as much as I hate it, the message is kind of exactly what I'm talking about. There's always going to be another thing, there's another hill, there's another battle, whatever it is. And, it doesn't mean you can't have goals. There might be this hill that you really want to summit, but not at the detriment of never living in the present. There's still the journey. There's always going to be the journey, and we can't actually rush through that. So I feel like this whole process for me has required a lot of recalibration, some unlearning as well, and trying to be strong in my own values and what I want to prioritize for me in this lifetime, being comfortable making choices that align with that. So, getting to a point where I'm enjoying the journey, I'm enjoying the now, and I do what makes me happy without worrying about are my choices considered valuable and who gets to decide where that value comes from, who gets to tell me that the way I'm using my time isn't valuable, and getting to enjoy that process rather than feeling like I have to be always working towards a thing. And I guess that means, you're not living aimlessly either. I've got some goals, I've got some dreams of what, I can finally visualize different futures that I could have. But there's a lot of options now, and leaning into living for the experiences, not feeling like I have to achieve the next thing and tick boxes really expanded my view on what I thought was possible for myself, because my own thoughts of where I believed I fitted into society were actually limiting me and limiting what I would allow for myself. So now it kind of feels like I'm living life on my own terms, and I've got to a point where being overseas for 2, possibly more years, and living with the intention that all I want to do with my time is enjoy it. I want to explore, I want to have new experiences, and being okay with coming home at whatever age and still feeling like I've lived authentically. Life's not going to be over when I get home. I'll be, I'm still going to be in my early 30s, but it's like these ideas about what you're supposed to have achieved by a certain age and different phases, and then there's the comparison with what everyone else around you is doing. So I just wanted to share, because I felt like this has been a big unlearning for me, and realizing that, I didn't want a traditional life. So therefore, what do I do? And feeling like the things that I wanted were not of value to society. So it's sort of bringing that power back to myself and being okay with my own choices and not comparing, and been lucky enough to have some awesome friends around me to say, well, of course you don't want these things, so why do you compare, So that's my yarn for today, of kind of bringing it back to what are your values, what do you really want, and deciding what is a good use of your time, because ultimately that's your decision. You'll get to the end of your life, you're the only one that's going to have any regrets either way. So I hope that you can figure out what that looks like for you, and in the meantime I'll be over here on the other side of the world, trying to keep happy in the present moment and continuing to make choices that I feel are of value to me and a good use of my time. So hope you've enjoyed my yarn. Thank you so much for being here. If you are enjoying the podcast, I would love if you can rate, review on whatever platform you listen on, and we'll talk to you next time.